Google Analytics not only records the data for each visit, it gives us tremendous power and flexibility in how we can view and analyze the data that's being stored in this database. This video is going to show a few of the most common and useful ways we can view and visualize the data. So for example, let's start out here. We're down at the channels report. We come under acquisition, all traffic, and click on channels. Now, this is one of my favorite reports. In fact, this is the first one I'm going to go to if I have a new client because it provides so much information about the current state of the site and how they generate, engage, and convert their traffic, all in one convenient report. So we have all of our traffic segmented into these dimensions, these rows here, and the primary dimension is set as a default channel grouping that's going to represent the ways the visitor came to our site. And on the other side of the table, these columns or metrics are split into three sections that group their function. We have the acquisition, the behavior, and the conversions. For example, new users metrics tells us all about the traffic we are acquiring. And the average session duration speaks to the behavior of those users once they're on the site. And then the goal completions metric is going to tell us whether or not they converted once they were there. Now, this tabular format, it presents a lot of data, but for us humans, it's not particularly easy to remember, compare, and interpret this information when it's just a bunch of numbers in this big table. So Google Analytics gives us some idea of how to visualize this information. It's going to help us gain some of those insights. The first option is to take these numbers and turn it into a pie chart. Go ahead and click up here on the pie chart, and it will do that. Here we see our channel groupings just like we had before. We see the number of users, and we see that broken down visually here in the pie chart. So, of course, we see up here in the table that the majority here, 33,000 users come from organic search, and that's very obvious if we look in the pie chart, we can see that. Then we see there are three more that make up about an equal percentage of each other, and then a whole bunch of those kind of also-rans here that are a much smaller percentage. If we look down the numbers, we see that that follows here as well. Now, if you don't like pie charts, many people don't, if you prefer bar charts, we can do that as well. Click on the bar charts, and we get that exact same thing here. We see this visually represented. And the problem I have with this is that we have these numbers and then we see essentially the exact same thing over here again. What we can do is we can take advantage of the fact that we have two columns and we can understand one from a quality metric and one from this quantity. For example, instead of repeating users here again, what if I switch to something like bounce rate? Okay, so now what I have here is an understanding of the quality, bounce rate. We know that bounce rate is generally a good metric, meaning we want to have a lower bounce rate. And then over here we see the percentage of people. This is still based on users. So while this may have an incredibly high bounce rate, it also has a very low percentage of the users. And down here in referral, we see a very low bounce rate, not quite as much traffic. And then somewhere in the middle here, the vast majority of our users have a somewhat middle of the road bounce rate. Now, performance is really what we're focusing on here. So we have volume on the right, we have the performance on the left. And so if I look at these, one of the questions we have is, well, I'm not sure if these are good or bad bounce rates. One of the things we can do is switch to the next one, which is a comparison, and it's going to tell us how this compares to site average. So again, we want to switch this metric to something like bounce rate. And so here we'll see the number of users, and then we'll see the bounce rate for each of those. So what do we see right away is that there are only two of these that are in the green, the direct and the referral. Another thing that I see is that referral and social, these are going to bring about the same amount of traffic to the site, but they perform very differently once they get to the site in terms of referral having a relatively low bounce rate and social having a very high bounce rate. So even though they bring the same amount of traffic, what they're worth to me is very different. Now, speaking of worth, we can also switch this to something like e-commerce conversion rate. And now this is interesting here. We see a huge discrepancy between social and referral here for that last click conversion rate. In fact, we can switch this to total revenue. Come down here. And we can see that the per visit conversion rate is so good for this referral channel that despite the relatively smaller number of visitors, it contributes more overall revenue as a channel than anything else by far. Now, if you want to take this to the next level, you can come over here to the pivot. And we can see the same kind of notion where we have quality and quantity by saying users there, and let's take bounce rate here, and we see those. Or actually, let's go ahead and look at revenue. And we can group this. Right now we've got it again by these channels, but we could do something completely different. For example, we could put in here by country. And now we can see the default channel grouping over here of the rows, and then we can see the countries here, and for each country we can see both the quantity and the quality. And what's interesting, things that jump out here, for example, there are twice as many people coming from India, but absolutely no revenue, versus Canada only gets half the users. One might think, oh, I'm only getting half the traffic from Canada, but tons more revenue here, right? So we actually have attributed revenue, both quality and quantity, versus lots of quantity, but no performance coming from that. And lastly, up here, we have the term cloud, and this is basically just a word cloud. I think this is honestly borderline useless in most cases. So these aren't the most useful for analysis, but it's here if you want it. Okay, hopefully you're becoming more comfortable with how to navigate the basic visualization options. As we get deeper into our analysis, we'll find out that we can uncover far more actionable data if we know how and when to take advantage of each of these options.